Quadrant 1, right? We know the data and we know the questions. This is our classical data warehouse. We know what the people are going to ask, so let's put our data that we need to answer that question in a thing. Teradata, Oracle, Hadoop, Snowflake, it's down here, right? Easy. Then we go, what about a situation where I'm not really sure what the questions are? And I would say this is classic OLAP. For those of you that are younger, we went through this phase of building what we called OLAP cubes. We're never really cubes, but cubes help us because they were multidimensional, and a cube has one more dimension than something that's flat. But the reality was that we would basically pre-compute all the data, and we would say, this is my sales number, this is my cost number, this is my profit number, and then we would compute that by the store, maybe the store brand, maybe the product, maybe the location, whatever it is, right? We would build that out. And we build that out not knowing what the questions were, but thinking, actually, the questions are probably going to be answered in this space, right? So we don't know what the question is at this point, but we know what the data is, right? And this is this kind of number 2. This is what we've been doing for a long time. And I'd argue this probably is, again, what we do today with the database technologies that are out there. What's more interesting is this side, when we start thinking about unknown data. Because if the data's unknown, we haven't put it into a thing yet. Because as soon as we put it into a thing, we know it. And so this is an interesting scenario, because what I'm now saying is we may have some questions. We may not know if we have the data, or if we have the data, we may not know what format or what structure, or even if the data that we have is relevant to answer our question. So this is this data discovery. This is something that I would argue most organizations either aren't doing or don't do well. Because let's put our data into a thing. There are technologies out there that allow us to do this without putting our data into a thing. And then the last one is linking back to the innovation piece at the beginning, which is, well, I think this is probably true innovation. Let's just play, right? I just want to access data that I've never accessed before. It's not moved into a thing. I want to try questions that I haven't thought of until now. And I want to run queries. I want to answer questions now. I don't want to wait for that data management process, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, whatever. I want to run it now, and I want to get a 5-second response time, and I want to see what the answer is. And I want to see if that's relevant to the question that I've got or the question that I may have next. Again, there are technologies out there that allow us to do this. I mentioned about networking. Once we don't have to co-locate everything, once we can start running queries across organizations, across data, across clouds, across hybrid, without having to muck about with data to start with, that opens up a lot of this. And with this, I would argue, comes basically competitive advantage, right? The output of this, I hope this slide goes next. The output of this may go into one of these systems, right? So we may do all of our innovation. We may try stuff out. We may go, do you know what? Actually, this is really useful. Actually, there's one more step. Before I get to that, we may find something that we think is really useful. Now let's expose that as it is, with the data still in all the systems, to maybe someone in marketing. We go, look, we found this data. We think it's really relevant to you guys. Maybe you can use it to target customers better. They can use that as it is. We may wrap it up as a product, but the data's still where it is, federated, or whatever. And we get them to try it out. And we determine what the value is. And if there is value there, then we do this step. We go, do you know what? We know the cost of running this query or doing the data management process to get here. We know the cost of running the query here. We know the value is high, so now we can make the decision. Do we keep running the query across where the data resides? Do we move the data together and query it where it is? And now we're getting into answering that question before we spend the money on how much is this worth, before we spend the money on bringing the data together, if indeed we need to do that. And this kind of links to this idea of hypothesis-driven development. It's a whole methodology out there. That's not mine. I just kind of borrowed it, and I thought, actually, this sounds a bit like that. This idea, test, try, validate, test, try, validate, kind of keep going around this loop. And this framework allows us to kind of do that. So my takeaways, oh, crikey, I'm going to be a little bit over, sorry. My takeaways are this, right? Technology has changed. Data usage and ownership has changed. The way we make data available to people has changed. As organizations, I think we need to continue to innovate. We need to think about cost. We need to think about the value of what we're doing. Fundamentally, the way we exploit data just needs to change. And hopefully this, inspire is too strong a word. I'm not an inspirational person. But hopefully this gives you some ideas on ways and means of thinking about the world in maybe a different way when it comes to data.